I'm a freelance filmmaker and I'm moderating this. I'm not actually getting that involved. These guys, Ed and Olly, who I'll tell you a little bit about in a sec, are going to be doing all the talking. I'm not.
Mandy's also very good, so we'll be talking to her as well.
I'm not a self-shooter. I'm not a self-shooter because I'd just be looking up people's noses all the time if I was, because I'm so short. But I really admire people who direct and shoot their own stuff, because it's just a huge, as far as I'm concerned, it's a huge challenge. And I think it'll be really interesting to find out today just what is involved in doing that, because there's a hell of a lot to think about when you're shooting, doing the sound, and having to direct and deal with tricky situations, characters, and get a story and get that back into the edit suite. So Olly Lambert, filmmaker extraordinaire, has got an amazingly eclectic CV, and I knew Olly when he was a young researcher, and was at the same company as him when he made his first film, which was about taking 4 weeks to find a girlfriend. Very brave. He has grappled with subjects as diverse as Rasputin, rioters and their children. He's been in war zones. He's done the complex camera rig films. He did one of the family series. He's chased storm. He's filmed storm chasers. He's even filmed with Ross Kemp for his sins.
Sorry about that.
And, you know, all his films have incredible heart. And some of them he has shot with cameras, using crews, and quite a lot of them he's self-shot and done it all on his own. Ed films a lot of cheery subjects. He's filmed in war zones from Afghanistan, the Republic of Congo, Gaza, Yemen, and Pakistan. His last film was about the Norway massacre, which was a 2-part film, and he also recently worked on a really interesting series called Secret Pakistan, which exposed the history of Pakistan's involvement with the Taliban after September 11. And so we're going to start off by talking a little bit about the pros and cons, which I know are a bit obvious, of self-shooting, but I think it's a good place to start. And then I want to find out from Olly and Ed how they got into the whole self-shooting thing, because there's different ways to do it. So who wants to kick off?
Well, I've got a thought a good place to start would be to show, I've got a couple of clips, 2 very short clips of films that I've made. The first one I'm going to show is from a film I did quite recently called My Child the Rioter, which is a Wonderland. And that, very, very early on, I thought this is going to be not just shot with a crew, but I wanted to really go to town on having a crew and really make the whole process very formal and, in a way, quite objective, in a way that self-shooting can be often very intimate and very subjective. And that was for a number of different reasons, but the main thing was there was a particular kind of quality that I wanted to get out of the interviews that I just didn't feel I was going to get if I was shooting myself. And I'm going to show the first clip, which is from an early part of my... Did anyone see it, My Child the Writer? That's a few hands, that's always nice. And this was shot with... I had a cameraman, camera assistant, sound recordist, AP, there was me, and there were also a brother and a sister in the background behind me. So this is important just to think, and also we spent about 2.5 hours completely rearranging the front room of this family, and then sat them down with huge lights, reflectors. We turned their front room just before Christmas, ripped out the Christmas tree, put in reflectors, and it was a huge palaver, which usually as a self-shooter would make my skin crawl. I think, oh God, I just want to come in, film, and then slink out again. But went a complete opposite way. And so I'm going to show you this clip and just explain why I think that it worked in this way.
I felt pretty untouchable after a while because I thought, yeah, they can't do anything. You know, I am going to get away with this. I can do what I want. I can start pushing the boundaries a bit further.
And what boundaries did you push? Rather not say.
Yeah, I'd rather not say.
Is there anything that you regret doing?
Yeah.
What?
I wish I'd done more. I wish I'd made even more out of the opportunity.
Can you be specific?
No.
Liam, was there a part of you that was cross with him for going down?
No.
No, we'd have gone ourselves if we were young enough.
Don't get cross with Ryan.
No, he's a good lad. He's on the right agenda. We know he's not out to cause trouble. He wants to try and make a difference.
How would you have felt if Ryan hadn't taken part in the riots?
I would have thought what's up with him. I thought, you're 18, you're angry, you're being charged £20,000 getting educated. You need to be angry, lad.
But what's going to be achieved politically by nicking some trainers?
Well, it's a redistribution of wealth in a way, isn't it?
Oh, come on, Ryan.
Well, when I seen that night, I didn't see a crowd of yobs attacking random shops. I seen the disenfranchised members of the working classes attacking, you know, the shops and the government institutions.
Isn't that just your interpretation of burglary?
Yeah, but robbing trainers isn't political. The reasons for robbing trainers are political.
So that's the very marvellous Parks family from South Manchester. Now, what that... I've done I mean, I know that just out of people... how many people here have shot their own film themselves? And how many people have also shot a film with a crew, cameraman? Okay, great. That's about half the room. I mean, the nature of this was, in this film, what I really wanted to do was drill down into the relationships between rioters and their parents, or rioters and their families. Now, the very formality of doing it, and I really wanted to spend, 3-4 hours having these interviews. That one was about 4 hours in the end. And usually, as I said before, I kind of don't like the formality of bringing in a large crew, and I don't like the fuss it makes, the noise it makes, the disruption. It draws attention to the filming process. On this, I made a very conscious decision to say, right, I am going to totally draw attention to the filming process, and I'm going to put lights on you, and I'm going to confront you with a lot of people, just to make that conversation formal, and so that you will not get off the hook. And all of the interviews, to some extent, in that film, just pressed and pressed and pressed and pressed. And it was like putting a Bunsen burner under a cauldron, because they couldn't get off the hook. And they forced themselves to actually articulate things which weren't particularly nice or pleasant, but were complicated and understandable. And that gave a quality, I think, that I could never have got if it was just me in a room. The nature of just me in a room with the camera, it's very informality. It can be a blessing and a curse. It's brilliant for the intimate stuff, but it would always feel like they could slightly slip off the hook, or they could, oh, I'm just going to make a cup of tea, or look, can you talk about that later, or shut up, Olly, can we just... And I wanted to create an environment where they couldn't just get up and leave. And that's something I think is really useful for testimony films, things that are driven by archive, or difficult conversations where you want to be able to challenge people. I think that's where a crew becomes a kind of army at your side. The complete flip side of that is things that when we're self-shooting, and I think we'll hopefully jump over this quite quickly, because I think we all know what the benefits are, but the huge range of benefits, like the amount of time that you can spend somewhere if you've got the reduced cost of shooting your own stuff, the fact that you can be in there for a very long time, you can be able to turn over in seconds, you can get very, very close to people. It just will inevitably, with time, get you into a situation that is going to unfold around you in a way that you'd always want as a documentary filmmaker. So I'm going to flip side of that, I'm going to show a clip of another film I did a few years ago called The T-Boy of Gaza. That was self-shot. I lived in Gaza for 2 months and was just always had the camera with me, and it was just a matter of time before, and it was focusing on the actions of the events in one particular hospital, Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza, and the characters there, particularly a T-boy. And I'll just show a quick clip from that.
One. Bus.
The other day,
I was walking back past the hospital and I was caught between life and death. There was some fight going on between the Jandia family and some forces inside the hospital. They were shooting at each other, throwing grenades, shooting, and I was caught between them. I saw my son selling his tea. He was holding his kettle and running with the crowd. I was scared for my son and scared for myself. I couldn't even save my own son.
When they all start fighting, it's usually over nothing. They're not allowed in the surgery with guns. But when they're told they can't take weapons in, they'll shoot.
على التلفزيون نحكي على التلفزيون تلفزية بحاجة مهزلة صار طفو تحت رجلي أنا ضليت واحد يتفرش في الباب مروان ماخذ الأرض قاعد على المصلية ليش طخوا علينا ايوه تعال يا عم مروان خذ الأرض أخليه يعني
نعم الناس الدكاترة شردوا من الاستقبال ويسابوا يطخطخوا بعض مش عارف والأجانب والمكتب مش عارف فين ما هو العمل في عرضك يعني احنا قاعدين على الأرض أنا قاعد أنا والأجانب كلهم على الأرض
What's happening?
I called the Minister of Health. He promised me to solve.
في توجد دقمش وحسنين 100 واحد دقمش ومثبتين احنا يعني بنحكي معك واحنا مطرحين على الارض فوق بعض.
Exactly, we don't know what's happening, but there's shooting inside the hospital, inside the roads inside the hospital. We don't know who shoots whom. The news said that there is a conflict, familial conflict between two big families. One died, 10 injured. Two of them severely in a critical condition, shooting everywhere, and we are afraid about ourselves.
Anyway, so, I mean, it's scrappy, it's sort of running around, it obviously looks a bit rubbish, but and it's not just the fact that I was on my own, which meant I could move very quickly and had to move very quickly and get that kind of sequence, but I simply wouldn't have been in that car park at that time with that kid unless I had the money and the time, having saved the money, to have been that long there. And I think that, there's so many advantages to self-shooting. And my point is about showing those two clips is just always thinking about what the benefits are, what the advantages are, and playing to those strengths, rather than trying to do something that's more formal, that looks like it's a crew shot thing, because you won't really have that quality. It's not necessarily a thing that you should be chasing.
Yeah, I mean, just one other thing to add, especially for you guys who are new self-shooters, is, looking at the two styles that Olly's just identified. I mean, the thing is, what's happening now, I think, is that you can be asked to try and create the crew style on your own. Like on the last film I made in Norway and on the Secret Pakistan film that I did, where there were a lot of very formal interviews in Afghanistan. The idea was we want it to look like a properly lit cameraman interview. So I turned up in Kabul airport with 10 bags of equipment weighing 120 kilograms and was expected to essentially light it, and sound it. And I think as self-shooters, actually, if you can get yourself over the kind of technical things you need to learn and learn whatever techniques you need to do that, it gives you a freedom to, as Olly's saying, think about, okay, what is the best way of shooting this? Maybe in a sort of more formally lit, a formal sit-down interview, I will get more of what you were saying, that intensity of response, basically, rather than just sticking a camera on someone as they're walking down the street or in their house, you know, more relaxed. And I think, you know, that is the way self-shooting is going now, basically. You are being asked to do everything, really. So that's what you should be aspiring to do, is learn all the tricks, including big cameraman tricks.
Before we get into the whole preparation side of things and what you should be thinking about, can you kick it off, Ed? Talk about how you got into self-shooting, where you learnt about what you had to learn, and how you started making broadcast films.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, a lot of you look like you've already made your own films, and I thought it was going to be more beginners here. So you've probably already been through the same process that I did, which was, yeah, essentially, in order to get an opportunity to make a program, you had to know how to shoot. And so, you know, as Mandy said, I've been to a lot of hostile environments, but I started in Dalston Market. I got a friend of mine to take me to Dalston Market for the afternoon and run around and shoot a short film about Dalston Market, which was actually one of the most aggressive places I have ever shot. I was being tripped up and having my camera pushed away from me. And but really, you know, the only way to begin is you just got to teach yourself, really. Read as much as you can and get out into situations and then sit back and show it to people who know what they're doing, know what they're talking about, have done it before, and get them to give you feedback. I mean, that's what I did. I had an excellent friend, a guy called Phil Cox, who's a brilliant filmmaker. We went 3 times to different circumstances. Then he sat me down for an hour, looked at my footage, and, you know, that's how I learned, really. And I was lucky enough to have been, a company had said to me, if you learn how to shoot, we'll give you a chance. But essentially, you know, you should all be doing that right now, because that's also the future.
Mm. What about you, Olly?
Well, the self-shooting thing came up really because it was, I'd done bits and bobs, but there was, I got a film I made in 2003 in Iraq, and it was at a field hospital, British military field hospital. And it was really simple. It was a Channel 4, and it was a very simple budget thing. I'd either get to shoot for 2 weeks with a cameraman, or 6 weeks if I could shoot on my own. So I promptly picked up a big camera, and that was the only way to go. And it was, I have to say, a baptism of fire, that one, because it was, I'd done a lot of photography before, so the sort of framing side of it and exposure and focus was all right, but actually being able to sort of interview and talk to people, I found it very difficult to juggle the technical side of my brain.
So you shot that with a big camera, not a little handheld PX 1000
I took both. That was a film called Battle Hospital, and I took out a PD-150 as it was then, so it's like, you know, just like the 305 or the Z1, and I also took a DSR 500, and I spent the first few days shooting on the PD-150, and obviously it was much easier. I could get my head around it, but then I just looked back at some of the rushes, and it just didn't look good enough. I was in this incredible desert landscape, and it was really a shocking place, and it didn't visually carry it. And we had some good lenses with the 500s, so I thought, well, as I'm based in this one place for 6 weeks, I'm not really running around all over the place. I can be quite structured about what I film, when I film it, where I am. I can probably get away with this. So I then switched and shot nearly everything on a 500. Which actually, after a while, I found the shoulder-mounted camera much, much easier to use. They're much more expensive, but I found that actually, photographically, everything is so much more ergonomic on those cameras. They're really designed they've evolved for years to, you know, there's an iris, there's focus, it's all there, it's all in your left hand. And it's very hard. The only thing that's really bad at those shoulder-mounted cameras is, I find, is talking, to kind of conversations with people. It's just fucking heavy, and also you've got half your face is covered up, and I like to have my whole face showing, so it's a bit of an object, but it can work. But I found that visually, that's a good sort of middle ground. You know, it's shooting on a big camera that will give you something visual. There's also this whole new generation of 5Ds and 300s, but which we could talk about later, the pros and cons of them.
So shall we go on to the prep side of things? How you prepare yourselves before you go off filming. Do you want to
shall I kick off?
tell us?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I go to quite extreme places, and I don't know whether you guys are planning to do that or not, but I break it down into, well, 3 things, really, especially if you're going to extreme places, but even if you're not. Number 1 is, you know, you need to prepare yourself physically. I mean, as Ollie just said, cameras are heavy, you know? If you can't hold a camera that's maybe weighing 6 or 7 kilograms for like 2, 4, 5 hours, you know, you're simply not going to get the stuff you need. If you're not physically able to keep up with a protest march, stay there all day filming, you need to think about, you know, hydrating yourself. If you've got any illnesses, you need to make sure you've got everything on your person that is going to keep you on your feet. Because if you're not on your feet, the film's not going to happen. That's point one. Point two is, in terms of kit, there's 2 parts to this, really. Number one is you need to be thinking about, what do I need to film this? So I need my mic, I need my batteries, you know, it's things like power, sound, how will I monitor sound, but also, what happens if something goes wrong? What? I should have dived under the desk there. Poor training. But what happens if something goes wrong? I need backups. Like, for example, I was once filming in the Congo on a trip, and I had to take a bike into the jungle to get this place I was going. And just as we were going along, a twig snagged my headphones and ripped them off my ears and smashed them. But I had a separate pair of headphones with me. So you really need 2 of everything, I would say. And you need to think about, how have I got that on my person? How close am I to my kit? So is my car right next to where I'm going to be filming? If it is, I can leave the kit in the car. Maybe I'm going to be away for an hour, in which case I carry a bum bag. And a bum bag normally has everything I need to film up to 3 hours. But maybe I'm going to be gone for 24 hours, and I don't know when I'll be back with my kit. So then I'm thinking about, you know, a replacement camera in my bag. Because if on hour 12, the main camera gets dropped, smashed, whatever happens, what am I going to do to keep filming? So that's the kind of preparations, that's the level of thinking that you have to do in terms of kit. But the second thing you need to do, and this comes down to something Ollie and I have talked about, is when you're self-shooting, you want to clear as much space in your head as you can so that you're thinking about the film and the characters and the quality of life, and you're open to what's happening in front of you. And in order to do that, you need to be like a samurai with his sword, right? The whole idea of being a samurai was that you've used your sword.
I can't believe it.
I know. I told these guys I was going to say it before, and they were like, yeah, go for it, mate.
Ed is the ninja of documentary filmmaking.
So, you know, you've got to learn somewhere. But no joke, you need to be able to... You don't want to be looking at your camera thinking, oh, where's the button that changes exposure? You know, how am I going to adjust sound? And here's a little tip for you that someone else gave me. I can't claim it. What I do is, when I get my camera, when I'm about to go on a trip, I put Velcro strips near the key buttons that I need, so that if I'm moving, I can move my fingers across and by touch, geographically locate myself in my camera. So, you know, create little L shapes next to, say, the iris control. And other things that would just allow me to keep the camera to my eye and keep it rolling, but allowing me to make the adjustments I need to make. And then the third, much bigger thing is about the thinking, obviously. The preparation. The most important thing, really, if you've done all the steps that I talked about before, is the preparation of thinking. And I've talked a bit, so I don't know whether you want to...
I mean, I think this is... I imagine that all of this stuff, and I've got some more to say, it's kind of obvious and it's simple and it's common sense, but it's absolutely essential before you prep to go and shoot anything. I mean, I totally agree with what Ed said. I have my own little systems, and I've worked those out over a few years, and you've got to find out what your little systems are yourself and your tricks and shortcuts. And I will always have I have a system, like, for example, that I've got a particular kind of bag, which means I can be filming within about 20 seconds of putting the bag down, and that's how the mic goes on. I've had made a headphone that mixes stereo to mono, so I can have it in one ear, so I can also have the other ear, which is a safety thing. I always have a second pair of headphones. I do a thing, I don't use the Velcro thing. What I do is I get in IKEA or from Homebase, you can get those little stickers. They're like plastic, sort of tiny sticker plastic cushions. So when cupboard doors close, they close so softly. They're usually round and slightly domed. If you cut them in half, take the sticky off, it gives you a little semicircular bit of sort of protrusion that I put above certain buttons, usually above the auto iris button, or the push auto on the Z1. I could always find that button. I think the Velcro one's a good one as well. There's all these things, but the whole point of them is not so you can be really quick. It's so that you can free up your brain to actually concentrate on what's important, which isn't so much, you know, focus, exposure, all of that stuff, it's important, but you're there to tell a story. You're not there as a cameraman, you're a director, first and foremost, and then you're a camera person. And that's what you've got to free up your brain to do. I can't agree more about the holding. I mean, I cannot. I did a film in Lampedusa last year, and I ended up filming about 7 hours of rushes, which was about 12 hours carrying the camera around. I mean, that almost killed me, and that was a Z5, you know, and that's a small camera. So being fit, I mean, yoga. I know Leo Regan, who was a real pioneer of self-shooting. He was really into Pilates and Tai Chi, a lot of Tai Chi, just to be able to hold the camera steady. Or yoga, or, you know, these things are kind of, if you are filming for long periods of time, then they can't be overstated. But I think the big point here is that it's all about, it's not, as I say, it's not about being quick. You know, being quick is really great, but you've got to free up your brain for the bigger stuff, which is so it's not being a cameraman, it's about being a director, and it's shooting a story, telling a story, shooting scenes, not just being somewhere and spraying. It's thinking about what you're filming and why you're filming it. And I've got a particular, because can I do my bit now about 5Ds? Yeah. Right. I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about, there's a whole sort of cult going on. No, that's like got a thing about it. Building to this, right? But there's, like last year, I don't know if anyone's seen Hell and Back Again. Anyone seen that? Hands up, seen that? Hell and Back Again, you know, shot on a 5D by Dan Fung Dennis. It was nominated for an Oscar. Absolutely game-changing documentary in that it was shot on this whole new generation of large sensor cameras that give you very shallow depth of field, highly visual, very filmic, and look absolutely amazing. And I got really obsessed this time last year when I saw that film, and I thought, this really ups the game on how a self-shooter can make a documentary. It's one of the best shot documentaries I've ever seen, and it was shot by a bloke on his own with his little rig. There's a real blowback from that, I'm finding. So there's the 5D, the 7D, the 300, the C300, the Canon. There's also this new 500. There's a whole new family of large sensor cameras which give this incredible look. But I'm finding more and more, talking to young filmmakers, first-time filmmakers, that it's really easy to get them to talk about their rig or what camera they're using and what lens they're using, if they're using primes. And I'm just thinking, brilliant, but what's your story? You know, what's the film about? And it's sort of like a comfort zone where thinking about what your film's going to look like, what the feel of it, what the lens is going to be, it's great to have that, and it's really, really important. But it's almost like a kind of, I call it DSLR displacement. It's a way of not thinking about the stuff that you should be thinking about, which is story, and its character, its narrative, and what is this film about? And that's really fundamental. I was recently doing something for the BBC on a film that I really wasn't enjoying. It was very difficult to make, and it had real problems. It's dropped now, thankfully. But I found I was really struggling with it. But my way of dealing with it was to obsess about my equipment. I was getting bits of software for downloading the cards. I could tweak the microphone a little bit. Could buy this, buy that, get an extra USB stick. It's because I wasn't thinking. I didn't want to think about what a complete nightmare this film was. And I think if you start obsessing about your rig and your camera, it's worth thinking about why, because that is totally secondary to the bigger issues. And I think it's important that, you know, people like Dan Fung can shoot Hell and Back Again because he got 10 years trained as a stills photographer, as a reportage, a top level, you know, grade A reportage documentary photographer. He thinks, lives and breathes iris and exposure and focus. That his hands can do it. And until you're at that level, I really think carefully about whether you want to be doing those cameras, because you've got to concentrate really hard on keeping them in focus. And if you know, it's all very well having it really lovely in focus, but if the person you're talking to thinks you're just obsessing with the camera and more interested in your rig than you are in them, then you're in a lot of trouble. So I think that's got out of my system. I can always riff a bit more on the anti-300 thing.
Also, because I think what you're saying is that, you know, you can be really technically adept, but if you don't, just moving it on to the story a bit more, but if you don't come away with a film and all the prime elements you need to make a really good film, that there's not, you know, no amount of technical wizardry can get that film. You've got to, there's another level that you've got to get to, as well as operating the stuff, getting it in focus, getting it properly exposed, blah, 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 to make the film.
I mean, I think, you know, Ollie's dead right. And the key thing is, you know, what that's symptomatic of, that whole obsession with certain kind of camera and the shallow depth of field, is people thinking about images in the wrong way, because ultimately you're all filmmakers, and I actually get quite frustrated with a lot of people in my world, like current affairs journalism. They'll be myopically focused on the detail of the story and the facts, and they don't think about the pictures. You know, you want to tell a story about the CIA torturing people, you know, in black sites somewhere around the world. Fantastic, brilliant story. What are the pictures? How are you going to fill an hour of this? And what this is symptomatic of, the obsession with technology, is thinking about images not just for themselves, not the content of the images. You know, that's what you need. You need to think about pictures. You must be thinking about pictures from minute one, but you need to be thinking about pictures that are going to help you tell the story. You know, it's the content of them. It's pictures that are going to illuminate, not illustrate. You know, that's what you need. You need a quality of thinking about your pictures that isn't about, hey, this is going to look nice, but it's going to have meaning behind it.
Were you going to show us a clip?
I was. I mean, that was all in relation to preparing for a scene. So maybe we talk about story and then we can apply it to a scene.
A way to sort of move that on is that, I had a really good thought. I've just forgotten what it was.
Oh, no.
That happens
I hate
all
it
the
when
time.
that happens.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was how I remember that. So this session was called self-shooting and self-directing. I mean, I think that, you know, what it comes down to with your self-shooting, you know, I think people here look pretty experienced actually, and you know, you all know what you need to be able to do. You need to get it in focus, got to get exposure right. You've got to know exactly, you know, roughly how you can frame it. All of that is self-shooting, but really what you want to get to is a point where you're not actually self-shooting first, you're self-directing first, you're directing, you're thinking about, you know, what your story is. And the less that you're thinking about self-shooting, the better. That's going to make you a better filmmaker. It might make you a less good cameraman or a DOP, but you're not there to do that. If you're a self-shooter, you're first and foremost a director. And that's what's got to come to the fore, really.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, the job is always, I mean, as a self-shooting director, you're like any director, really, whether you've got a £100 million crew or whatever it is, you know, what is your story? That's what it comes down to. And by putting in that thinking, you'll be in a position where when you come to self-shoot, if you've done the thinking, if you've thought about your story properly, you've put the thinking in advance, you'll be in a position to capture what you need in a scene. But also, I mean, I think, you know, we're both of the same mentality, which is that the more you plan, right, ultimately documentary, the best documentary is about responding to life. It's about the little moments. It's about the things you didn't expect. And you need to have put in all this planning and thinking in advance to allow you to be in a position to throw your plan away and say, hold on, this is not what I expected, but it's more interesting or more illuminating or whatever it is. So, you know, it's about the rigor of thought about story, and that applies to pictures, about an approach to scene. You know, that's
Can I ask a question here? Because, I mean, I've tried and failed to shoot things myself, not just because I'm filming up someone's nose, but I don't feel comfortable with the whole process, and I find I can't concentrate on the directing and what I need to be getting out of something, because, and maybe it's because I haven't practiced enough, maybe it's just because I'm crap technically, but I just can't get my head space separate enough from the whole technological process, and I want to know how you guys do that. How you, I mean, I know we've talked about, there's some kind of psychological thing as well, because I know you've talked about feeling comfortable enough with the gear, and also that just not becoming an obsessive thing. But there's something else as well.
If you're self-shooting, you're doing three jobs at once. You're a sound recordist, you're a camera operator, and you're a director. Maybe a producer as well, but they're your three jobs. What you need to be able to do is make the first two, the camera and the sound, as streamlined as possible. For example, I will, almost without exception, I will have. Can we get technical now? Is it okay to be a bit geeky? Does anyone have a bit of geek?
Yeah.
Excellent. I will always have.
This is the only bit.
Always, without exception, I'll have the audio levels set to automatic, almost without exception. The only time I wouldn't do that is if I'm only running a top mic, and I'm in a situation where there might be a loud noise, like a conflict zone, or something might happen that's a completely different range, in which case I'll put the top mic into channel 1, split it onto audio tracks 1 and 2, and put 1 manual and 2 automatic, and have 2 set, the manual set very, very low. That means if something very loud does happen, I've got a clean channel of that. Otherwise, then if there's more than one person, if there's one person in the room I'm filming, radio mic on them, top mic to cover anything else that comes in. If a third person comes in, I'll have a radio mic on the person that talks the most or is closest to the largest number of people. We'll have them radio mic'd, and then always favour sound that's away from that. So I've got the top mic to cover sound that's away from that. I mean, the emergency green auto button, that button, auto everything, or that's the panic button. That clip I showed you from the T-Boy of Gaza, when that guy suddenly sort of, gets a bullet in the chamber, and I thought, oh fuck, it's trouble. You can actually hear me click that button. It's the first thing I did, was go, right, I want to alter everything. I don't want to think about anything to do with exposure or focus. I just want to be able to get out of here as quickly as possible, and the camera not completely bleach out, or the sound completely ruins. That auto button is a complete lifesaver. It's the parachute. I'll always have that. I'll always have a little bit of plastic over that for an emergency. What else? I mean, there's loads of little tips and tricks, and they only come really from just, it's all about just trying to kind of keep your brain empty so you can concentrate on the important stuff, which is usually having some kind of real communication with the person opposite you, having a real conversation with them, and as Ed says, like really being open to the things that you weren't expecting. So that you can completely change direction if something, the beauty of documentary is that things will happen of their natural course, and you want to be there to capture them, and it's being able to feel confident and capable of going with that when it happens. Do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go on.
Well, there's also that thing that Olly was talking about earlier when we were all talking about what we were going to talk about, which is if you've got a crew, you're directing your crew to do what you want them to do and to get what you want them to get. But you made the point that you have to direct yourself.
Yeah. See,
when you're on your own.
One of the best things about having a crew, particularly a cameraman, is that, and when I work with camera operators, obviously that you want to be technically accomplished and have a good eye. The thing that I really love about working with camera operators is that they firstly force me to have a conversation with them about what we're all doing today, and that really keeps me honest. It's like, okay, so what are we doing today? It's like, okay, and you have to articulate, I'm trying to make a film about writers and their parents, and what I'm interested in is not just an interview, but the way that people might interact between themselves. Right, suddenly, actually, the film starts to take shape and becomes kind of real just by vocalising it. When I was an AP, director Rebecca Frayne I used to work with all the time, she'd always say to me, write a billing, write the thing that would be in the Radio Times when you start doing a film. It always drove me potty, because she was always fucking right. That actually, it's a fantastic way of forcing you to think, what is this film about? What is my line through it, simply and clearly? Interestingly, yesterday at the session with Charlotte Moore, she's saying, really, the best thing that commissioners want is a single sentence. But you need to know what that sentence is. You can't go, it's kind of about this, there's an interesting character doing that, and maybe they might go here, and that's really good, and their sister's really funny. It's like, that doesn't help me at all. So crews are really great for that, because they want to know, they force you to have that conversation with them and vocalise what your film is about. Secondly, the thing that you really can't, there's no getting away from, is if things are going wrong on a shoot and you're losing your way and thinking it's not what I expected and it's not quite working, people aren't reacting the way I thought they were. What I love to do is just sort of like invent an excuse, like the fake phone call, and go outside with the cameraman and go, I haven't got a fucking clue what I'm doing here. What's all that about? And it suddenly becomes okay to not know what you're doing because you can work it out. And I really miss that when I'm shooting on my own, because you have to always be on it, and it's very hard just to disappear and think about it. The lesson from that is that even when you're not with yourself shooting, it's almost like you need to have that conversation with the crew, but with yourself. Write it down, or say to yourself, right, what am I doing today? What scene do I want? What would I say to a camera operator? Okay, there's this person, John's going to be doing this, I'm hoping it goes this way, I think it'll go that way, I'll be really interested if this happens, and the coverage that I need, what's the scene, what's the beginning, middle, and end of a scene? It might go completely differently, change your mind, but start off with that template and have that conversation with yourself, just as you would with a crew. And I find that that's a really useful thing to be doing. And if you're uncomfortable doing that, if you think, I don't really need to do that, then you've got a problem, because it means you don't want to, and it's not simple. And you need to be able to come out with a simple answer to the question, which is, what are we doing today?
Yeah, I mean, I take it actually a step further than Olly, especially when I began, which was I actually storyboarded. I storyboarded the scene that was coming up. I thought, if I'm in Hollywood and I'm about to make this scene, how would Hollywood shoot this scene? What would be Hollywood's beginning, middle, and end? And I'll even go to the point of thinking, all right, I need a shot of this. So actually that kind of feeds into the clip that I was going to show. So I was in the Congo, and we had a situation where we were going to meet the sort of descendants of the Hutu militia that were responsible for the Rwandan genocide. So this was what the core of the film was about. We were going to their base. It was kind of one of the moments in the film. And we'd done our security checks, and the guy said to us, okay, it's great. You drive to this village. The base is like a kilometre out. You turn up in the village. You'll be met by the guys. Go to the base, have a chat, and then you're off. You'll be back in bed, by sort of 11 o'clock tonight. I was like, all right, cool. But I'm going to think to myself, supposing it doesn't quite work out like that, supposing the car breaks down. So I decided I'm going to take enough kit to keep me functioning for 24 hours or so. And I thought, all right, what are the component parts of this scene? Well, obviously, the journey out there, the meeting of them, the walk up to the base, and then the arrival at the base, a bit of a sense of the base, and that's kind of my opening sequence. And I thought about what shots might work. And again, going back to the quality of the image, I was thinking, right, this is my big going into the heart of the monster. I want to try and create moody shots. I want to create a sense of the threat of these guys, what appalling people they are, basically. And then I set off to make it. And if we roll the clip, you'll see kind of how that plan then worked out in reality.
I drove deeper into the Congo towards areas which are dominated by the Interahamwe, the Hutu militia. They even collect taxes from Congolese civilians. An extremist and murderous organization charged with crimes against humanity. The Interahamwe have been publicity shy for years, but I have persuaded them to meet with me in a remote village.
Sam.
Moi aussi, capitaine Saddam.
Capitaine Saddam. Saddam.
Saddam.
Comme Saddam Hussein.
To keep the Interahamwe sweet, we handed over the beers and sodas.
So I'm setting off into the hills with the descendants of the militia that murdered 1 million people.
Our destination was one of their key strong points, deep in the mountains.
So we've just walked into the area that's under the complete control of the Hutu militia. The last government post is a little group of huts and trenches on a hill just over there.
The Interahamwe are believed to have at least 7,000 fighters, but up to 35,000 other Rwandan Hutu civilians are under their control in the Congo.
Well, the good news is we've covered about 10 kilometres, mostly uphill in the baking midday sun. The bad news is that we're not even halfway, and we've got to go to the top of that hill.
No British television crew has filmed with the Interahamwe for a decade.
Bonjour.
Bonjour, comment ça va?
Ça va un peu fatigué?
Je m'appelle Gérard.
Gérard. Vous êtes le commandant?
Commandant brigade.
The brigade? Ah, bueno beaucoup. This is Gerard. He says he's the brigade commander for this region, the Southern Brigade. Bonjour.
Bonjour, ça va?
Ça va un peu? Un peu fatigué? Wheeled out the big guns for us. We've got a divisional commander and a brigade commander. A defensive position from heaven. We're at the top of a series of extremely steep hills. The international community's been trying to get these guys to go home for 13 years. But entrenched in a place like this, it'd take a lot of force.
So the point of showing that particular sequence was there was a situation, I turned up, I thought we'd be home, you know, as I said, by dinner. Instead of that, like that little sequence you saw, that was 8 hours of walking through the mountains along precipices, I mean, up virtually sort of 90-degree gradient, really extraordinary, extreme conditions. And the point was, because I had my plan, I had my shot list in my head, I'd worked out how, you know, the component parts, the arrival, the meeting of them, then the walk up, then some shots that conveyed, you know, here's a bunch of lunatics on top of a hill, basically. I had that checklist in the back of my head. And so that meant I could put the camera down for 3 hours because I knew, okay, I've covered all the shots I need to tell that beginning part of the story. And because I also had the checklist in my head, it meant that like little moments like where Sam, the reporter, cracked that joke with the captain, you know, that was the last thing I was expecting for some sort of banter with these guys. But it meant, you know, I was confident. I arrived in the village. I was like, I need to get my shots of the guys. I got those shots, and then I was free to say, okay, what's actually going on? Oh, well, they're taking the beers and sodas. Sam's having a chat with the captain. And I got in the bank what I needed for the sequence. And that's where the storyboarding comes in so handy, because you've worked out your shape, your beginning, your middle, your end, the pictures you need to tell that. You're covered on that basis, and that then frees your mind to respond.
Did you carry a second camera up that mountain, just in case?
I did give it to my fixer.
There's another element of that, which is just picking up what Ed just said, is that when you're working with a crew, there's a great moment where if you said at the beginning of a shoot, right, this is what I want, you know, just like Ed said there, you know, I want a sort of meet and greet, I want a sense of the journey, I want this little moment. When you've done that, when you've had that conversation, there's often a brilliant point with a good DOP who'll say, after about an hour or two of filming something observationally, we'll sort of go, yeah, I think we got that. And it's brilliant, because you often, you know, you run down and we've got this, we've got that, we've got this, we've got that, and you sort of cut it together very sketchily in your head and think, okay, we've got it. If you don't do that, I mean, I've then, when I've not done that, I just have filmed and filmed and filmed and filmed and filmed, waiting for someone to sort of pat me on the head and go, there, Ollie, you can go home now. It never happens. Only you can do that if you're self-shooting. So to map out these structures, it can mean you're not knackering yourself out and then giving yourself loads of footage that you're going to have to watch later, and have that horrible moment, which we should maybe sort of have a vote on a word to describe that moment where you realised you didn't need to film all this stuff because you've already got it, and the confidence to go, no, I have got a close-up of that, I have got those wides, I've got the paranoia wide. Have you ever heard of paranoia wide? The shot of the whole room where you can't see anyone's lips move, that you can just put anywhere to cover anything. The paranoia wide. You've got a paranoia wide, that's probably got it, and then you can move on and think how that works. And that actually makes you a better director. You know, you don't have to be filming all the time to be a good director. Actually, a good director is the one who says, I've got that scene now, that I can see how that's going to work, and be editing in your head and thinking how you can move on to the next.
Yeah, because I mean, I think, you know, actually the skill of being a documentary, or any director pretty much, but especially in documentary, is not, it is obviously about what you include, but it's really about the decision not to include things.
Absolutely.
You know, in an edit, obviously you're going to have hundreds of hours that you can't use, and you know that also applies to the process of gathering the material as well. You're taking command of a scene, basically. You're shaping life into something coherent that has a beginning, middle, and end, that is part of a story and isn't just a kind of, you know, things happening with no driving purpose through it. And so by making those selections, as Ollie says, you can then, or as I did on that walk, I could say, you know what, I don't need to film 4 hours of climbing up a mountain. I only need to film 10 minutes, and in 10 minutes, I'll get the 20 seconds that I need.
And often that takes more confidence, I find, to say to yourself, I'm going to stop now. I've got enough of, you know, tired presenter walking uphill. I've probably got it. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, quite a lot of that's the confidence of experience too.
Yeah. And that's I think that what gives you the confidence isn't the filming, it's actually going into the edit and realising that this, you know, any particular scene, like, I don't know, if you're thinking about this, Ed, you're on that, you know, this is something that's going to take you 8 hours to walk up a mountain. It only takes a 30-second thought process to actually work out that in any film, this scene cannot possibly last more than 4 minutes. Really, if it's a half-hour film, it really can't be. It's boring. You're walking up a track. How many times are you going to show that? So so the confidence that you get is from experience in the edit, I think. So, and so much that's about being a director. Again, a director in the edit. It's not about knowing how to use your camera or getting shallow depth of fucking field.
I just want to ask you both a really simple question: is what do you like about self-shooting?
I like not having to be with people. And I love the sort of solo element of it, of being able to just go and not have a sort of a little pack with me. I have to sort of manage and chaperone it, feed and just those conversations over lunch. I just want to get on with it, and also the sense of I just love being able to sort of embed in stuff. I mean, I enjoy that process in a way more than the filmmaking. I'm less interested in filmmaking than I am in being in interesting situations or environments or doing an interesting thing. And the filmmaking for me is a much, if not more, a process of allowing me just to do that.
And I think your films really show that, because you do get the sense of this trust that's been built up with people and this incredible access, and it's, you really feel that embeddedness and that relationship.
Right. And I find if I haven't got that, then I just find it very difficult to pursue. The film, ironically, recently that's just gone down with the BBC, I just didn't really feel I wanted. It was supposed to be about a very close family, and I just didn't really want to be with this family. I just didn't want, and that's really, and so I could have made the film, but it's a massive part of one's life. It could be 6 months where I have to really, give quite a lot of myself, and that's very exhausting and can take a lot out of you. And that's time you won't get back, and it's time, and you can invest somewhere else, and that's really important for me. And the self-shooting, really allows for those journeys to take place for a longer period of time in a more intense way. So I mean, yeah, it's very liberating, I find.
What about you, Ed?
Yeah, I mean the same thing really. I've got quite a sort of mad work ethic, so I like to just shoot, really to try and get the most out of any particular scene, get the best pictures, and so I like the fact that I'm the only person that, to boss around, basically, and I'll always obey my own commands, hopefully.
And then what's it like self-shooting with a presenter in tow? Because you work a lot with reporters.
Yeah, I mean, my experience of working with reporters, I actually treat them, I guess, probably similarly to how you might treat a character in an observational documentary, because they are often bonkers. Like Sam Colley is bonkers. Yeah, Sam Colley he's not the easiest man alive to work with. I'd say to him, "Will you do a piece to camera saying this?" And go, "No, I'm not saying that." And so you have to almost, I treat them like they're characters. So you try and learn, who is this reporter? Is this someone who's going to be coming out with ideas and is really enthusiastic, or is it going to be someone who's just wants to get home and have a beer, in which case how am I going to manage him? Because especially in things like Unreported World, which I've done a lot of, he is the way in for the audience. He is the sort of guide through a complicated story. He or she is the person that the audience is kind of relating to and understanding things through. So I need to understand what the strengths of my reporter are, what the weaknesses are, so where do I compensate? I've worked with reporters who are constantly in my headphones saying, I want to say this, I want to say that, and others who will be in a scene and say, right, what do I say now? Like, what's going on? Where are we? And so really, there are no hard and fast rules other than it's another human being that you have to deal with, that you're almost making an observational documentary of, a reporter in an environment. Like someone like Sam, that's his best, I think, because he's just cracking jokes, he goes up and talks to people, and he's looking to do things differently. So you just almost have to hang on his shoulder and see what he does. Other reporters you need to manage very tightly, and that comes down to, again, your planning. You need to know what your reporter needs to say at certain moments and make sure you've got those so that you're covered.
What do you do if something goes wrong technically and you're in an intense filming situation?
I've always got a backup. So that's the thing. Like, things go wrong all the time, and I just make sure that I've always got on my person a replacement.
But you, Olly, you wouldn't necessarily always have a replacement, would you?
It really depends. I mean, I think that's, just from what Ed's been saying, I think that if I was doing another, long-term self-shot thing, I'd probably take even just one of those little flip cameras. Those little flip cameras, you know, with the red button, amazing sort of HD quality things as a backup. But I usually have a backup of, or a workaround for most situations. Like I'll always have 2 radio mics. You know, batteries, all that kind of stuff. I've always got a little bag in my camera bag that's got micro screwdrivers, pliers, Velcro, tape. You know, gaffer tape. You know, if gaffer tape can't fix it, you're not using enough. Yeah, it's great to meet people who haven't heard that joke before. So there's always things that can go wrong. There's always a workaround, and I've just learned that from being in situations where I haven't prepared. So anyone important?
yeah. Take it if you need to.
That's great. It'd be really interesting.
We're all friends here.
God, taking her battery out, that really is all going to extremes. Wow.
So the Israelis can't listen in.
Sorry, everyone. We were going to talk a little bit about, I don't know if we should, because there's a lot of experienced people in this room, about interview techniques and...
Well,
I don't know
maybe
if that's
we should open
what
it out and
people...
see if anyone's got any... I mean, we've talked for a long time. Are there any...
Before they do that, though, I
scenarios?
just want to hit you with some scenarios which I haven't
I've been looking forward to these
told them
all day.
about. They're not that bad, actually. But I can ask Ed even more dangerous ones.
Olly's been an
So if you're
hairy
filming
situation.
a simple setup, you've got 2 people, and suddenly the room fills with 5 more people, and you've only got the basic kit. What do you do?
Well, the main issue is going to be sound. So the first thing would be... So did anyone get that? So say the situation again. Filming 2 people, suddenly it fills up
You're
with
filming
loads.
a very simple setup, 2 people, and suddenly you find yourself in a situation where there's more than 2 people, substantially more than 2 people, but they're all saying, some of them are saying really interesting things that you are going to be you're going to use in your film. What do you do?
So the first problem is the issue you've got is sound, because you've got to follow the sound at all times. You've got to you can as long as you've got the sound, you can cut around it. As long as you've got lots of mute faces, you've got cutaways. So firstly, I will always follow the sound, and I will also get loads of mute listening shots, so I can cut it. I will make sure that whoever's radio mic'd, I want to radio mic one person who's relatively central or who talks a lot, and then I will, with the top mic, will just follow the sound if the radio mic isn't picking it up. One other thing that I've done a lot, if people are sitting around a table, it's very simple, but to get a second radio mic, wrap up the lavalier thing and just clip the mic so it's resting on top of the radio mic box. And that box is then basically a sort of portable mini boom. And I'll often just pop that on the middle of a table if people are sitting relatively close, or on top, or on a flower pot somewhere if it's near people. And the nature of the radio mics, those lavaliers, they're omnidirectional. A gun mic, it literally, it takes a very narrow range of sound. A radio mic is almost 360. So you get as good sound if you're behind it as in front of it, which is fantastic on a personal mic, obviously. But on the middle of a table, it will pick up equally in as many directions. As the closer, the better. So if I have to be at a distance and the top mic isn't picking it up, I'll have one radio on a person, and I'll do that little portable thing, and I'll drop it on a table. I've also got another little gadget that's quite useful. I have a second phantom-powered mic, like a K6 ME66, with a AA battery, and I will turn that phantom power on and plug it into a radio mic. I've got a cable you can get. It's a female XLR to a mini jack or the 4-pin for the radio mic transmitter. So you connect a gun mic to a radio mic transmitter, and that I've got a little portable stand which can point along a line of people here, or can point at someone across the room if they haven't got a radio mic on. But the critical thing with numbers would be sound, I'd say, and that would just be so mute shots, follow the sound, and any little tricks you can do to get as much sound in. How's that? Did I pass?
Yeah, very good. Would you do anything different?
Yeah, exactly the same. Yeah.
Okay, so there's one way to do it, or get a sound recordist.
Yeah, get a sound recordist and grumble to your exec.
What about if you're in a situation where you've got fantastic access to a character, and there's someone else that comes into the situation who's being really difficult about the filming, and there's some intense scene, and this person's being very disruptive. Because, you know, I mean, in my situation, I'd say to the AP, can you get rid of that person?
Yeah.
What do you do? I mean...
I think that's part of the scene, you know. So there's a... Did you see that? Was it Nigeria's Witch Children, or did anyone see that programme? Yeah. And there was an amazing scene in that where, because what they tried to do was take kids who've been declared witches, take them back to their villages and get them accepted again. And there was one little girl that they tried to do this with, and one of the villagers came up, said, if you leave her here, you know, I'm going to kill her, basically. And the way they handled it, which I think, you know, it is part of the scene, it's part of the story. And so it's that thing about you've got to respond to life. And so, again, I'll be thinking, what do I need to tell that part of the story, but then see if I can get my camera down and maybe see if we can make something happen. So in those kind of situations that I've faced, an unreported world or whatever, I'll just try and get some shots of the guy saying, turn the camera off, you know, whatever it is, 10 seconds of that. That's enough that will allow me to include that within the story, and then I will put the camera down and say, okay, you know, what's the problem here, and try and discuss it. But again, it's all about getting
after you've got the scene.
After you've got the scene. So you've got to know what the scene, you know, what you need in order to tell that part of the story. And if you've got it, then just as we've said, as soon as you've got it, 10 seconds of it, camera down, and see if you can make something happen.
And what about you, Olly? Because, I mean, on T-Boy, I wonder if, you know, I've been thinking about, did you have people saying, you shouldn't be filming this, don't film this, or...
Ironically, on that, actually, people were very keen. They wanted, everyone in that, they wanted people to know how difficult things were. I mean, it's always, that's a universal problem, whether you're self-shooting or not. Admittedly, if you have got someone else there who can deal with someone who's disrupting things. If you can't, I mean, I've been in situations where it is just annoying, and it's a sort of knock-on effect where people come in and they put off the person that you're, by creating a problem that makes them less inclined to be filmed. That really is tricky. I think I said you have to sort of tackle it head on, really, and I would probably just down tools and say, right, let's work out what's going here and have a very, very frank conversation. And that's when self-shooting always looks at it. It can be a disadvantage, because if it's just you and a little camera, you're sort of styling yourself totally towards having a very small footprint. And that's great when you're filming, but at times like that, I think actually it'd be really useful to have a massive, great camera and a big crew and a van outside. It's almost like, hey, we've come all this way, and you know, you could maybe apply that kind of pressure. But you're very easy to dissuade. You're very easy to put off and delay, because it's very, you know, you're low impact, so you can be brushed off quite easily. That's why the clip from My Child the Rioter was so good, because you know, that we were like a brick wall of, you know, we're going to ask these questions. It wasn't confrontational, but you want to set a sense of you're robust and you're there to stay. So that kind of, you know, being able to go, you know, being rather the flotsam and jetsam of that particular day. It's like the milkman's late and there's some cameraman here, and but we can do him tomorrow. It's probably all right. But I'd probably try and tackle it head on. I'd have a very, very sort of very direct, rather robust conversation about this isn't going to work, and what are you going to do about it, and try and call their bluff, I guess.
And what's the toughest situation, Ed, that you've ever found yourself in, and how did you deal with it when you were self-shooting?
There's quite a few tough situations, I guess.
I mean, because you're in dangerous, and a lot of dangerous situations. So it's slightly, again. I mean, Olly's been in war zones too, but that's a different kind of scenario, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, one that always.
It's another level of stress to have to deal with.
One that always sticks with me, and this is maybe quite an interesting thing that you have to face if you're a self-shooter. It was like it was my third ever film, which was on the West Bank, and I was still pretty new and not entirely sure of what I was doing. It was the first time I'd really been in an environment like that, and we filmed these famous protests that they have at Berlin. Anyway, cut a long story short, the Israelis were kind of pissed off, so they decided they were going to smash the protest up, and they went into the crowd. I was with my reporter and a Palestinian fixer, and they started firing rubber bullets everywhere, and you know, those can kill close enough range. So we all started running across this very rocky ground, and me and the reporter got sort of safe distance, and we were laughing because we were like, wow, that was bloody close.
Were you still filming?
Still filming, yeah. But I mean, it was all kind of like, I'm just holding the camera and it's recording and I'm running. But, and we stopped and we were laughing, and she just said, oh, look at that poor guy back there. And we turned around and it was our fixer, basically, 50 yards back, and he'd been hit in the back with a tear gas canister and knocked headfirst into a rock. And so we ran back, and his head was like, he was unconscious. He had a gash down his head. He was bleeding heavily. He looked like he was dead. And we put him on a stretcher, and it was like a First World War battlefield. We were running through this long grass, and there was tear gas landing around us and rubber bullets. They were still firing at the stretcher. And I carried on filming, basically, and I filmed all the way, you know. In fact, I filmed a whole tape of just being in the ambulance, you know. I just didn't turn the camera off. But when I look back on it, you know, I did things like I filmed him lying there, basically, my colleague, my friend, lying there, and I went for a close-up of his face as well. And that was a pretty strange experience to think about, looking back on that, because, I mean, in a sense, that is, again, my theory, you know, which I've been trying to push on you all. It was almost like I went into autopilot. It was almost like there was a bit of my brain saying, you need the wide shot, you need the close shot. And that was cycling away, while the other part of my brain was going, Jesus Christ, like, Massad's dead. And he wasn't dead, thankfully. But so that was the toughest, I think, both in terms of I was so green and it was pretty scary, but also because it was a real dilemma, you know, being on your own there. And I knew, you know, and there was the kind of the fear, like if I stop filming, you know, I'm going to get back to the edit suite and my merciless boss is going to say, so what happened then? You know, where's the rushes? And
Telly's great,
you're fired.
Isn't it? Really lovely, I love it.
So, yeah, I mean, that's another thing that, you know, self-shooting is you're on your own, basically. And if you don't come back with the stuff, you know, there's no one behind you that you can say it was his fault. You know, that's it. And but that can put you in situations where, you know, it's quite difficult, I guess, for you as a person, basically.
What about you, Ollie? What's the toughest?
I was just thinking, I mean, as a self-shooter, the things I find most difficult actually aren't the technical things, or what I find. It's not having. It's just feeling lost when I don't know what's going on. If I'm losing the story, I'm not sure what I'm doing. I'm not sure why I'm there. That sense of that can be. I find that personally very difficult, of not being able to go to someone or have some kind of ally who's someone who's outside of the environment that I'm trying to film, and just go, what are we doing? You know, what are we doing today? I don't understand. I've lost my confidence in this. I'm not sure if that's right. I mean, I remember shooting the Battle Hospital one. That was 2003. We're living on this sort of camp, and that was, you know, in tents from the desert. It was pretty unpleasant. But the thing, and you know, it was all the threats of possible chemical weapons, and it was, you know, all that stuff was going on. The thing I found most difficult was just not knowing what my story was. And I remember, you know, most mornings for the second half of about a 6-week shoot, I'd wake up about 5:30 and just go off somewhere and be in floods of tears, of like panic, real panic of what am I doing? I'm missing it. I haven't got the story. I've come all this way. It's all sort of, I don't know what I'm risking all this stuff for. I don't know what I'm doing here, or what the story is, or who is the main character, and what are they doing, and why didn't I film that? And not having a sort of ally to go off to and go, what are we doing today? That's what I find very difficult about self-shooting, and I find that very hard work, far more hard work than the physicality and the technical stuff. It's just not having. Just feeling sort of isolated at a time when you could really do with that conversation about what are we doing, and not being able to pop home and go, oh, you know, put your feet up and think this is all a load of bollocks, and then start again in the morning. I find that very challenging. That's the side of self-shooting that I won't miss. You know, that's the lovely thing about a crew, is that when it can be a bit collaborative. I know I said earlier, I like that.
But so what do you do? Who do you talk to? Do you talk to yourself? Do you ring the exec, or could you ring the exec?
I write. Well, not on that situation, no, because we had no communications out. But I will. What I did do, actually, I rang my editor Stefan Ronovitz. He's brilliant, and I said, look, I really don't know what the story is. I don't know what I'm doing here. The thing that I came to film isn't actually there, but there's something else that's more interesting. And he then said, what you found is so much more interesting than you thought you were going out for, and that gave me huge confidence. So a conversation with an editor I often find is really useful, or I'll write. If I can't talk to someone, I'll write. I'll try and write even just a paragraph. In fact, just a paragraph is very good. What's the film about? You know, or write the billing. Just to sort of focus the mind. It's quite meditative. It's like, okay, what is the focus of this? 'Cause it's so easy to get lost in this kind of maelstrom of technicalities, and you've just got to keep it simple. You know, keep it simple. The technicalities and the story, I'd say. Well, that was a bit therapeutic, wasn't it?
A bit intense.
Sorry about that.
I'm going to throw it out to the floor now, because I'm sure lots of you have got questions. And so can you wait till you've got the microphone in your hand till you start asking your question, because we're filming this. So who has a question for Olly and Ed? Down there? In the cap?
Yep. Two quick questions, if we can. One, what cameras would you recommend for like, over-the-shoulder, XLR, not on a massive budget? And you kind of covered it, but shooting a scene, obviously you've got multiple things to do. What are like, the basic check-off things that you would make sure you kind of cover?
Well, I just bought a camera, actually. I mean, I really looked into the cameras recently. I do every now and again have those spates of going through everything. There are so many cameras out there. There's no simple answer to that. It really depends on the style, what you're going for. I really looked into the 300, this new 300, and there's also the EX1s, EX3s, and all that sort of stuff. In the end, I just bought a 305, the Canon, which I don't really like in many ways. Crap in low light. It's very standard. Doesn't give you a very sort of filmic image, but for actuality and observational, it's a real little workhorse. And I think it's just like the Z1, which I really love shooting on the Z1. It's very simple. It's far more ergonomic than the Z1. It's light. It's got the ability to do relatively shallow depth of field if you want it to, but in a situation where the sort of stuff I film is usually quite runny aroundy, and you've got to get it quite quickly. It's got a small enough sensor to give actually quite a large depth of field, which for actuality I think is really useful. But that might not be, it really depends on the kind of thing you're going. If you've got more time or it's more set up, if you really are comfortable with the whole SLR thing, then the 300 is an absolutely amazing camera, but it is 10 grand plus lenses, which says 20. But the 305 I'm really kind of enjoying, actually. It's simple, and I don't know
do either of you ever use 5Ds?
No, I mean, 305 is what I shoot on as well. I couldn't agree more. Like, it's a really, it's quite robust as well, and, it's just very nice, trustworthy
it's solid.
camera.
Yeah,
really solid.
I mean, I did the 5D thing. I don't know. I got another chance to go on about the 5D. Brilliant. But I mean, I did a shoot last week with a really good DOP. It was actually for a sort of commercial thing, and we took a 5D, a C300, my 305, and a Sony 900, the XD cam, HD cam, and also we shot stuff on a Phantom. And for the actuality stuff, although he tried with the 300, he had a 300 with the rig and the shoulder thing and the batteries, and he's a brilliant photographer, just said, you know what, for actuality, I just don't trust that the focus is so pin sharp and it's so shallow that I just don't trust it. And he ended up going with the 900. And if I can't shoot, but over the shoulder, I think there's a whole new load of Sonys have come out. There's the PMW 450 or 500. It's very good. Shoots on S/S cards. I really like shooting on that. Sorry, getting very technical now.
And in terms of a scene, I mean, what you shoot within a scene, it really depends on your scene and depends on your story. I mean, that's the whole kind of message, really, is that, you're going into a scene, you should have a thought in your head about how this might potentially fit with your story. What is the relevance? Why are you bothering to shoot this scene? What is the point of interest here? How might this scene, I think we can learn a lot from feature films, and just core principles of storytelling. In a scene, what's the beginning of my scene? What's the middle? How is this going to end? What's the payoff? And within that, what is the iconic shot, 2 or 3 shots maybe, that tell the beginning, that tell the middle, and that allow me to end, you know, and with one glorious shot that allows me to move on. So, you know, within those parameters, obviously, it depends on what you're doing, really. But it's about trying to shape life so that there is some beginning, middle, and end, I think, is what you need to be thinking about.
More questions?
Yes. As you both described, you're really thinking of, you're self-directing more than just shooting. And obviously that takes us to the next stage. You've already implied this. It's about the edit. Now, you're thinking already in terms of shots and so on, but how much direct control do you take over the edit? I mean, you're obviously much involved in this whole process. Do you actually sit there with the edit? Do you actually have a lot of control? Do you hand it over to the editor and say, okay, fine, you're an editor? How much do you get involved with
I always work with an editor, yeah. I mean, everything, I have got my own Avid, but I might do assemblies, but I really think it's a mistake to try and edit the stuff that you've also shot and directed. Occasionally it works amazingly. I don't know if anyone saw Looking for Sugar Man yesterday. Absolutely amazing, and that was shot, directed, and edited by the same guy. Brilliant. But I personally feel that it's a really collaborative process. I'll always work with an editor. And a good editor is someone who can take the kind of broad brush ideas and trajectories that you're bringing with your rushes and take that and take it to the next stage. So yeah, I'll always work with an editor.
Yeah, me too. And I think it's really important, basically, going back to what I was saying about directing is about what you leave out. You know, you need someone else who can come in and basically say, you know, I don't get this, or this isn't working, or this doesn't tell the story in the way that you thought it did, or you haven't got it. You need, by that point, I think, you know, I'm just totally agree with Olly. I think that's the point where that's the limit of self-shooting for me. I will always want someone else sitting with me in the edit to bounce around ideas.
So you don't find that, as you've been so involved in the shooting process, that you say, you know, you find sort of conflict with the editor saying, gosh, I spent all this time and, wow, you've missed something. I thought that through and you're going to leave it out.
Sorry, I missed that.
I couldn't really hear you. Can you just talk into the microphone?
I'm saying, you don't find yourself in conflict with the editor. The fact that you're so involved with the shooting that you've been in.
Yeah, no, you find yourself in conflict. But that's good. I always like an editor who says you're talking rubbish, you know, because that's what you want. It's that conflict of ideas. You know, that's what tests ideas for me. So I think I've got a fantastic scene. If it's not working for someone else, then I like that process of being able to fight with them and saying, well, I think it's important for this, and they say, well, it's not happening.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, a perfect example is there's always a situation where there's that scene or that interview that's taken you days and days and days to get, or the scene that you had to climb up a mountain to get. When you watch that footage, what you're thinking is how hard you had to work to get it. An editor will just look at it as rushes and go, well, it's boring. Yeah. That bit that you just happened to knock off when you had 5 minutes spare is much, much better and does the job for you. I made a film, the first film I did that was about myself trying to find a girlfriend. My editor, so we'd be watching footage of me sort of getting drunk and trying to chat people up, and you can imagine what that was like. And but he would just go, oh, he's really unfunny here. He's really boring. And that's me, and that's like but he's absolutely right to do it. Because they have that absolutely clinical view of like, look, they're watching it like people were going to be watching it on television or on a screen, and they will assess it on its merits, not how long it took to get, not whether it's you or someone else. And I think that's absolutely essential. I mean, I love that robust kind of conversation. Yeah, it's healthy.
Another question in the front. In the front. Oh, sorry, I'm breaking my own rule about the microphone.
As a former editor, I couldn't agree more with your responses to the last question, because a servile editor is a killer. The reason what I was going to ask about was you haven't mentioned release forms, which I find particularly nightmarish.
Release forms? Yeah. Yeah, I hate release forms. They're a nightmare. They're really useful. You do sort of thank yourself for having them. But I had a very interesting experience I did a film for Cutting Edge called Confessions of a Traffic Warden, and a lot of that was going to be out on the streets with following traffic wardens, probably getting into sort of argy-bargies with pissed off motorists, and getting to sign a release form was going to be quite complicated, obviously. So I had a very good conversation with a really head lawyer at Channel 4, who told me that firstly, you can't be. One of the interesting lessons, the side thing, was you can't be stopped from filming. If someone says stop filming in a public place, they have no right to ask you to do that. The response is you give your name, you tell them what you're filming and why you're filming it. And if they say, I don't want to...
Do you do this on camera?
Has to be on camera. And then if they say, I don't give consent to be used, you do not have no one has a right to privacy in a public place. So if they're in the street, all you can do is say, well, if they're in their home, then you obviously can't film them, that's private. But if you're in a public place, then they can't obviously be private. And as long as you're not blocking the roadway, you're fine. Now, if someone, to get an on-camera release, actually on-camera releases have worked terrifically well, and I do often use them. And I just say on camera, I'm Olly Lambert, give today's date. Do you understand? I'm making a documentary about blah, 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 blah. This is potentially broadcast on national television in the UK and potentially overseas in perpetuity. Are you okay to be filmed to take part in that? What? And they say, yeah, that's fine.
Say that in Swahili.
Yeah, but it's very. I mean, once they've said yes, it's hard to imagine a situation where they can later argue that they don't want to take part in the documentary. It's very difficult for them to do that, and it's probably it's as complicated as fighting a release form. If you have got it, it makes lots of people happy. It sorts out arguments. You keep production managers sweet, and you can fight a bigger battle. So it's useful to get them. But if you just, I always make a joke of it and just say, don't even try to make sense of it. It just means you let me film you today, and I'm really sorry we have to do it. It's usually all right and make a joke of it, but they're awful, toxic little bastards. I hate them. Yeah.
Who else?
I was going to ask about 3D. Have any of you had any experience of self-shooting 3D? And if you 3D. Have, would you have any advice about how to do it?
No.
No.
I'm afraid. Sorry.
I mean, probably not in the situations that Olly
Afghanistan
and Ed.
in 3D, that would be something.
It requires quite a bit of setup.
I'll come and see it.
No, I'm serious. Someone showed me it's actually a camera light, a Z1 camera, and it's got 2 lenses on the front, so I haven't used it or anything. I just wondered.
No. It's another great reason to not think about the story, okay. Sounds like to me.
Thank you.
There's a question just down the very front here.
Can I just ask one thing?
Oh, yes.
Hold on to it now. You know about dilemmas he was saying about, I was just thinking about, what you were just saying, Ed. Is there anything that you wouldn't shoot? I was thinking about, the Aileen Wuornos interview with Nick Broomfield, and somebody was saying they were shooting in Haiti when the earthquake went, and they stopped shooting, filming, and helped the victims, whereas all the journalists came in and started filming everything.
Yeah.
So is there anything that you wouldn't shoot?
I think, I don't know, it's always hard to just talk completely hypothetically, but I mean, if it's someone who's actively in trouble, and they're not getting any help, or I'm their only source of help, then I would definitely stop to help someone. But if that wasn't the case, other than that particular circumstance, my view, and this is the sort of school of hard knocks way that current affairs tends to work, is I will shoot everything, but then debate it when we get back. Yeah. So I made another film in the Congo, and we found all these dead bodies in the jungle, basically. And the bottom line is, if you haven't got it in the camera, you can't use it. So I came back with some really strong stuff, and in the end, probably 15 minutes of just like rushes of these dead bodies, and in the end, we used 2 shots, I think. But it was also, it's basically having the option to do that. I mean, or if it's gratuitous, if it's not relevant to your story, it's also about how relevant it is to your story. You don't want to just film something horrible just for the sake of it, because it's like dramatic. But the bottom line is film everything and then fight your exec not to use it.
I totally agree. I mean, I'm sure we've all been in sort of odd situations. I filmed a British soldier dying, and sort of unexpectedly. And as it was happening, it was a very, very horrible experience, because you're obviously, I was just feeling, well, what am I doing here? And this is a huge invasion of privacy. But the flip side actually was that to have not filmed that would have been a really gross act of censorship in some way. To have been in a war zone for that amount of time and then not shown the really, really bad stuff would be a real abdication of professional responsibility. So I did take the decision of filming enough so that there would be a scene to show what was taking place, but to totally have the conversation about whether or not that could be broadcast at a later date. And it's a tough call, but I totally agree with Ed. I think that if someone's in personal danger and you can save them and you're putting your shot or your TV production ahead of someone else's life or well-being, then that's a bad call. But if there are other people that can help, and often in those sort of situations, you're probably not the best person to help if there are other people there, and actually you get in the way. So that's often, and that's not an excuse. I mean, that really is a factor. There's a problem for ambulance crews where people just try to help and they do get in the way. But if it's down to you, then obviously people's sort of safety and well-being.
I mean, I think that's also a really important point, which I've come across a lot, which is the amount of censorship that goes on. And I think it is, I mean, it's a debate, probably not for now, but just in general, I think it's important to capture images of, of the reality of things, no matter how horrible. Because without that, like, we had a big debate over this Norway film I just did, because this is the Breivik, the guy who shot all the kids on Utøya. In Norway, there are no images, really, that have come out of the dead bodies. People won't even, in interviews, people would say, yeah, I saw a body covered in blood, and then they'd say, sorry, can you edit out the word blood, because I don't want to upset the family. And we had access to some images that were pretty full-on, unpublished, of some of the dead, and we chose to use 3 of them, because my view was that if you don't do that, if you censor that stuff, there are people out there who think he's a good guy or that he had the right kind of ideas. And unless they're confronted with the reality of what these horrific incidences can be, they can get away with thinking that, I think, because they're protected from the reality. That's my little rant.
You've got a question.
Just as an extension of that, although this wasn't what I was going to say, I was recently sourcing some archive from Japan of the tsunami, and the TV companies there won't license that. They will not let you have footage of the tsunami. Or maybe they just didn't like me, but that's what they told me. Yeah. But I was interested in, Ed's talking about his relationship with his reporters out in the field, having been a reporter for a long time. And you keep saying, I'm on my own there.
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering, what are they doing? It doesn't seem like there's
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because that was one thing I wanted to say, that self-shooting, it does, and we perhaps emphasise too much you're on your own, but you're never on your own. You might have your driver or fixer or your characters or just people around you, and I think, there are plenty of great reporters who are keeping their eyes out for things.
I didn't mean it like that. I just thought, I came from the other side of it, because in just straight news rather than doing so many of the longer things, it's the reporter is kind of, I suppose it's more a reporter-director, usually, and with the cameraman. And hopefully you have a great relationship, and the cameraman absolutely knows what they're doing, and in fact, if you over-direct, you're going to have a very bad relationship with them. But I was just interested in how it worked the other way, where you're clearly the camera director, and that is your remit. And in a way, what is there left? The reporter seems to be almost like a talent, as opposed to really reporting.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I think that because the responsibility for finishing and the edit, because you're in the reporter, I mean, on a lot of unreported worlds, the reporter was essentially free to disappear for 2 weeks and then come back in. Yeah, it was quite. It was a
good job.
It was a way of doing things. Yeah, indeed. And sometimes that was just because they lived in different countries and they needed to go back to their families. But yeah, I think it's because the responsibility rests on the producer-director ultimately to shape the material at the end. That means they have the burden of thinking through the scenes. And sometimes you get fantastic reporters who are feeding into that and who really want to be involved. But I don't know, maybe it's just Unreported World's particular style, but that was how it evolved.
Can I just, I mean, I'm going to wind this up now because we're getting close to 3 o'clock, and I just want to say thank you to Ed, and thank you to Olly, and thank you to Directors UK who've put this on today. It's been really interesting, and I've got some really, real insights, but I'm still not going to go self-shooting like my crews.